Good evening, everybody. I'll explain very briefly who I am and where I come, what I do, and then I'm going to ask you some questions to understand what your interest is in the topic that I'll be discussing, in order to adjust what I say to what's interesting to you. My name's Rod Turner, as is evident over there. I think that's still me. Yes, it is. And I started out as an engineer, moved into entrepreneurship, and I've had the good fortune to build 7 successful startup companies, 2 of which we took public to the NASDAQ, the second of which is Symantec, the Norton antivirus company. I led that business within Symantec, the Norton business, which became Symantec, largely while I was leading it, and my team introduced the Norton antivirus. So that's kind of a little bit of what I've done in the past. I formed a venture capital firm with a close friend in Irvine during the internet bubble, and I've done a lot of angel and mezzanine investing, not angel as in that chap, but angel investing as seed investing in early stage companies, as well as mezzanine rounds and other similar guiding companies, mentoring companies. So this is since the age of about 25, I've been focused on entrepreneurship and building companies and helping others to do so successfully. Back in 2015, I launched my current company, Manhattan Street Capital. ICOs came along last year. They were there a little earlier, but they became apparent to everybody last year. So in addition to the conventional offerings that we do and IPOs that we help with in our online funding platform, we are now doing ICOs, initial coin offerings, and hence my having some expertise to bring to the table here that may be of help this evening. The reason why initial coin offerings are interesting is that, let's face it, if you've got an interesting business, in many instances, if it makes sense to use the blockchain, you can raise a lot more money a lot easier right now than in a conventional offering. So that is why there's so much buzz and excitement. So to frame that, about $6 billion was raised through initial coin offerings in 2017. And really nothing much happened in 2017 until April. That was when it really started, and then it went like that, went ballistic. In this year to date, which really means through June, the industry has exceeded 6 billion. It's around 6.3 billion. And the average transaction this year is about $30 million per company. Last year was about half that, about $15 million. So when you do something that fits and makes sense in this space, actually it is a lot easier to raise money for an initial coin offering, which is why entrepreneurs have been jumping on this and having a fun time with it, right? Okay, there's been a lot of excess and abuse because of naivete and potentially more base motivations. But in this country, the SEC has made it clear that's not okay. And so now there's an era of more prudence taking place and fewer transactions, but those that are being done in the proper manner. So that's kind of the context. One of the interesting things about token offerings is that you would think, well, there's shares, right? I mean, there must be shares of ownership, but they don't actually. Most current initial coin offerings are not providing ownership in the underlying company, which is kind of novel. You're buying someone who buys those tokens or coins is buying them because they believe they can go up in value. I'm not saying that's the best thing on the planet, but that is what they're doing it for. And part of the context is that Bitcoin, that I'll explain in a moment, it's whatever it is, $7,000 or so now. There were people that bought in at 50 cents and less, and people that bought in at $1 and $3 along the way. And when I bought a small position, I thought it was heinously overpriced because I looked at the backwards chart and it showed me that it was scary, risky, blah-de-blah. But now, since then, I look like a smart dude because I've held on to it through neglect more than anything else, and it's done really well. So that's kind of cool. But because of that factor, part of the reason that initial coin offerings are so currently vibrant is that there's an awful lot of people that intentionally or accidentally did what I did, except most of them are young techies. This is what I would say are the people that are initially currently investing in initial coin offerings. They are, I call them the Bitcoin wealthy. Of course, there are others, right? Ethereum has an insanely high return that it's generated for the people that got in early. I have some numbers here I'll refer to. Actually, I'll refer to them now because I've mentioned them. It would be kind of weird not to, wouldn't it? So Ethereum has, why aren't they telling me what I thought they were? Okay, yes, so initially they sold their tokens for a price of 36 cents, and they're currently trading at $475 per token. So if one was lucky enough or smart enough to buy into that, you've done pretty well, right? So in that context, and Bitcoin is more insane because it's gone higher, there's a lot of people who tend to be this, I call them the Bitcoin wealthy, people that are young techies, excited about the blockchain, which we'll get into, and everything that can be done with it, and believe in the revolution, all these positive things that can be done courtesy of the existence of what the blockchain does, and I'll get into that too. So whether they intended or whether they were lucky, they've made a lot of money. And you've got these young people excited for change, and they're in a position where they can cause more change. So they're investing, and they're the primary investor group in ICOs because they got the money and they are believers, right? That's a huge reason why initial coin offerings have been so successful. They're playing with house money in a way. Their cost was here, they're here. They kind of want to invest this excitingly or prudently, more emphasis on the exciting than on the prudent. Okay, so that's a little bit of context as to why initial coin offerings are attractive. A couple of other points around that. It's probably obvious, but may not be, that this is way the hell early right now because so much has happened and there's been so much buzz and excitement and so much change. If you're paying attention, it feels like well, Christ, there's so much happened, it's all over and done with. That is absolutely not the case, in my view. I feel like this is analogous to when the internet was first introduced and we had god-awful access speeds and terrible browsers available to us, and there wasn't a lot you could do. It was a real tiny subset of where the internet has gone. I feel like we're at that stage with the blockchain, and so it's an exciting time to be involved in this space because there will be and are tremendous opportunities if you take charge of it, if you get yourself immersed in it and choose to lever it. One of the nice things about conducting an ICO is that when it's done properly for a company, of course, always the caveats, right? It's a real company, it has its reason to be, people are going to like it, they will invest in it because they're excited by it. Then in that scenario, what you see happening is a company with virtually no money, but just enough to get started, going out, doing development, really developing a plan. It's more of a company concept typically. Not suggesting that that's the best approach. I'm just saying that it's possible to start out with a concept, raise the seed money, then raise the Series A, then the Series B, then the Series C, all in one continuum, in one transaction that doesn't take very long. And you even end up with a publicly tradable asset in many instances, if not right away soon. That is pretty radically better than what we are used to, right? So that's another reason why entrepreneurs are interested in it. So if I'm saying things that make no sense or sort of sound ridiculously, fantastically untrue, please hold me accountable, and I'm happy to leave right now. Let's face it. Okay, so it's a big opportunity in my belief. A lot of other good people, or a lot of people who are good, believe it's going to be a big opportunity as well. So what does the blockchain do then that wasn't already done that is adding significant value? So there are these things that it does. One is that, if you imagine an accountant, they make a mistake and then they fix the mistake, and nobody knew, they change the numbers and they fix it to where it should have been, and that's that, and they publish the documents accordingly, right? Well, in the blockchain, that isn't what happens. In the blockchain, a record is made of the mistake, and a record is made of the correction, and that is permanently there in the blockchain. So we have this permanent record of all the diddly little things that happen, which ends up being a very useful feature when you do stuff with it. That's a value-add functionality, right? Second thing to bring to mention is that one of the challenges in business with hackers and people trying to screw with it is that typically, Facebook and Google and most of the other companies that are and aren't tech, they have everything in one place. They might have double, quadruple, triplicate backups, but it's all in one place. So if somebody's successful in screwing with the system in the way, say, that Sony was hacked and everything internally was suddenly known. And so one of the things that the blockchain does that's really cool is it doesn't just make that record, which is kind of nice, but kind of similar to what you already get. It distributes it everywhere, very, very widely. And the logic of the blockchain, which is determined by the people who write any particular token system, because each one has its own set of rules, is written in such a way that it's incredibly difficult for one bad actor or a team of bad actors to take control, because everybody's got a copy of the same bloody records all over the place, which is a challenge technically to deliver high performance with, but it adds a high degree of confidence and security that the data won't be messed with. There's a hell of a lot of stuff that I'm saying here where it ain't delivered yet, right? There's a lot to do to delivering these things in an impressive manner, reliability-wise, security-wise, and performance-wise, but those things are being taken care of, and this is where we are going on the journey. Another interesting, attractive thing about initial coin offerings, really, actually, not about initial coin offerings, that's how you raise the money, about the blockchain, is that nobody has to be in charge, right? So you think Bitcoin, you say, well, Christ, that must be a big company. I wonder who's the president of that. Where are they? I'd love to be that dude or that dudess, because that would be pretty damn woo. And the team, I want to get on board, can I? They don't exist. The guy that was so smart as to innovate and create Bitcoin, which was the first such blockchain implementation that we're aware of, at least that I'm aware of, created it in such a way that it's without a leader. And so there are advantages to that. It means that once you have, say, a currency set up that's Bitcoin, as we do, then, because nobody's profiting from the entity in charge of it, then it looks like it's actually a currency, because it's not there isn't a business central to this that's profiting from stuff, right? It looks more, that's why the SEC has said it's a currency. And now they've said that about Ethereum, because it's already been out there a long time and they found ways to handle it that sort of explain it, which is really tough when people are doing the same thing now and not getting that same blessing, but never mind. The point is that it doesn't have to have a leader. So, Google can be pressured into releasing private information on any one of us or all of us, God knows what's happening, because that's what they're forced to do. But you can't do that with a network that has no particular person in charge. No person, no entity, right? That's an interesting thing. It allows you to do some stuff that couldn't otherwise be done. The blockchain uses what are called, I can't say it's I call it too, but Christ, I'm not anywhere near the instigator of any of this stuff. I'm just a participant. Smart contracts are used in order to automatically process transactions in the blockchain. So for each particular token system, there is a rule system that is defined up front and may be modified with time, assuming that there's somebody that has that authority to do so, and that enables transactions to occur without the involvement of human beings. It saves a lot of time and it saves a lot of cost, right? So if it's sending money, or if it's transferring title to a car or a house or any other property where you care about it, we'll be seeing that kind of thing taking place at very low cost with high reliability. And when you go in the case of property transfers, when you go to Latin America, I bought a condo in Latin America, in Brazil specifically, and I ended up having to pay about a 2% bribe fee to a series of different people to even get the damn transaction completed. And the last guy, who I had to wear long pants to go into his office in a screaming hot day to show respect, he was taking cash hand over fist and looking inside the envelopes and putting them in the drawer and upped the price because I'm a Yank, or at least he thinks I am. I'm British, but you know, let's not complicate his picture. Never, you see what I'm saying? We get past that. There's countries, just like they leapt from no phone to cell phones, smartphones in a lot of third world countries, we'll see no system at all, total chaos, to wow, the blockchain being used for stuff and done in a secure and reliable manner. Pretty cool. Yeah, so, and this functionality of the smart contract, well, all of these things have to be done really well. Tony and I were talking about that, and he was educating me. Tony Sequeira is an expert in implementing smart contracts and token systems in a secure manner. When it's done right, then it's really good, and it's really efficient, okay? So those are the reasons why the blockchain makes sense, or why it is interesting. It opens up the potential to do stuff that you can't do now. So the sorts of things that are happening are micro ownership of slices of real estate, right? So I don't want to, I can't afford, I want to, but I can't afford to buy part of the Taj Mahal, or that's a ridiculous example. But you know, a piece of real estate someplace, the Biltmore Hotel, assuming it still exists, I want to buy a slice of that. Oh, good, they put it on the blockchain and I can buy, you know, 0.003% of it for more money than I can assemble. But the idea is cool, right? You can have micro slices of ownership, you can be diversified in that manner. That wasn't really feasible before. Now it's feasible and can be liquid. So you can have this kind of advantage, things that weren't doable before, that now become doable. There's one medical company, a biotech company that we are talking with, we're exploring working with, that intend to have their investors who buy their tokens fund their development of drugs and then get a slice of the return according to how much they invested later through using the blockchain, which is kind of cool. And their objective is to lower the cost of medicines and to do it in a very democratic manner. So it's because it's a worldwide thing, right? I mean, these initial coin offerings are inherently worldwide, except where they're not, right? If you can't do it in China right now because they've said so, then okay, it doesn't include China. Or Japan has certain regulations and they're rather tight. Different countries, different systems, so it may not be completely worldwide, but it's generally pretty damn worldwide what's going on. And the US is more challenging because we have very sophisticated regulations which protect investors and make it harder to do these kinds of offerings. So I don't have a topic here about Bitcoin, but let me just spend a few minutes on what Bitcoin is. So I look at Bitcoin as being sort of the opposite of cash. It's like intelligent money. You know, the disadvantage of paying someone with cash is 2 minutes later they can pretend it never happened, right? Unless you get a written receipt, how do you demonstrate that you actually paid already? Oh, I don't have, who are you? I don't recognize you. You say you were here 2 minutes ago. Sorry, you know, that's kind of silly, but with Bitcoin, it's smart money, and so it knows whose wallet it sits in. It knows who owned it before and who owned it before that. The who part is really not quite true. It knows which wallet owned it, prior history, right? There's going to have to be changes from a regulatory standpoint over time so that some of these currencies, some of these tokens will have transparent ownership. That's what the regulators are probably going to cause to occur. Today, though, at least the Bitcoin the units of Bitcoin, the subsets of units, the pieces of units of Bitcoin, they know whose wallet they're in, and they know where they were before, and they know the price of the transaction. So that is one of the reasons it is actually quite difficult to steal crypto, because someone stole it, and everyone knows who it's owned by. That isn't a mystery. It's gone, but they have to get it back. But when the systems are all working smoothly, it'll be remarkably difficult for the person who stole it to spend it, because it knows who the hell owns it. And it's not that dude or dudess that is transacting it, right? So it's intelligent money. And then, well, okay, then what is it? What determines the price of Bitcoin? And that's about supply and demand, like it is with any currency. Yeah, you know, when you get a government like that of Venezuela, where they're printing money and they're experiencing, I don't know, 10, 20% inflation a day. Imagine trying to live with that. When that is happening, that is oversupplying the market and the price of the currency goes down, right? When you're in a country like the US or the UK and other modern societies where they generally do a pretty good job of managing how much money they print, then generally we don't see ridiculously high inflation. They determine the inflation partially by that. In the case of Bitcoin, what happened last year was this phenomenon of awareness. It's like everyone heard about crypto and they heard about Bitcoin especially. And a lot of people said, well, I've got to get into this because people are making a fortune. Look how much it's gone up. And they go and open a wallet. And what do they buy to put in the wallet? Bitcoin, of course, which increases the demand dynamically in a huge manner. And there is a supply system for new Bitcoin, which is called mining, where companies that put together high performance software and hardware like this gentleman here does, are able to create new units of Bitcoin at its full price, its market price, and sell them into the market. And they're doing an awful lot of number crunching to support the whole Bitcoin system. So it's not just that they're making money and satisfying these complex algorithms, which continue to get more challenging in order to limit the rate at which new coins are produced. Because you reach a point where it's like, we need another innovation, please. Come on, somebody, we want a 3.5 nano chip. Can you come along with that for us? You know, don't have it yet? Sorry, then that's going to slow it down. And in the case of Bitcoin, actually, we're not that far away from when there is no more printing to be done, where the mining will be finished. I don't know how long it'll be. When that happens, then the supply ends up being fixed. And if the demand is continuing to rise with time, then of course the price will go further up. But there are limitations and issues with Bitcoin that are being addressed in other currencies that cause us to have doubt as to uncertainty as to what the hell is going on. So I touched on the characteristics of people who invest in ICOs enough. Very few, as a proportion of the total, very few conventional investors are doing this. You know, the people in this room and those of us that we know, those of our friends that we know that are active angel investors in private companies, a very small slice of them are playing in the ICO world because it's new and different and scary, and there's been so much excess anyway to those that pay attention. As a result, that's increasing as a portion of the whole, but it's still very small. I'll attempt to hit on the most important issues. So we see companies all the time, right, that are doing regular transactions and those that are doing initial coin offerings. Obviously, we only do those that are SEC regulation compliant. That goes without saying. So those companies that approach us, we're always in discussions and explorations together and helping them where they need help to figure out what the heck it's going to take to make their token concept fly versus exist and not succeed in raising money and not succeed later. So, you know, by having hundreds of these conversations, I intend to be an expert soon on this. So, one of the things which is challenging is, you know, let's say a company has 2,000 customers and 1,000 vendors, and they're thinking, okay, we'll use the blockchain. We'll put everyone in touch and we'll grow the business. And then you look at the size of their universe and it's like, eventually they may have 20,000 customers and 2,000 vendors, right? So whilst you can add a lot of value with the blockchain in that business in many cases, why the heck would someone invest in that as an initial coin offering when they're looking at it the way that they are, right? Which is 80% of the money, 80 and plus more than that, are the Bitcoin wealthy that are looking for revolutionary change, right? Not a little incremental shift, you know, and a 28% per annum improvement in productivity for this, you know, really cool company that looks microscopic compared to what they're aspiring to see, right? So if you're going to raise money easily from the Bitcoin wealthy, who are the people in play at the moment, then you need to make something which is compelling to them. And they're looking for scale. So then if this company that's doing something which is too small, it's too finite, probably wouldn't raise the money successfully. What I would, in that instance, what I tend to recommend is, well, is there something which we can do to make this concept that you have for your token become scalable and become a standard worldwide for transactions of a similar kind? Of course, if it's been done already, then perhaps not. But if it isn't being done, perhaps this is a very interesting opportunity that offers tremendous traction when you're raising money and tremendous traction when you're building the business. Am I making sense? There was one person. Yeah. Yeah, so then the challenge is, well, it's like, well, this is what we do already, Mr. Turner, but what's it take to do this? Well, Christ, it takes a lot, to make that token network function and fly and develop all these nuances and extra value-added functionality. This is non-trivial. They're really separate development projects anyway. You got the money now because you did that ICO and ain't it great, but you've got a hell of a lot to do to deliver on it, right? That's the challenge. It's not just your company. If it's just your company and that is what you want to do and there's a relevant, useful blockchain use, you're probably not going to raise much money, if any money, to do it. And maybe this is where we get into a utility token that isn't an investment token. It's probably never, ever going to be one. Okay, so there's some other things around that are relatively obvious, I think, which I won't touch on. How to decide if your token is a security that must be sold through a SEC transaction versus anyone can buy it and I can make a lot of money because I don't have to do that. That's a utility token versus a security token, not meaning antivirus security, meaning it's a transactional security. Even if it has its same precise set of rights that the coin offering transaction would have had in Belgium, or Switzerland, because that's where it was invented, and all people get is ownership of a token. If they're buying into it as an investment, then the SEC tends to say if they're buying it as an investment, it's a bloody security, tough luck, and you've got to use our rules. So the head of the SEC has said 99% of the ICOs, or 99.9% of the ICOs he's looked at are securities transactions, or were, and should have been, right? So a utility token, in my view, one way to take this off the table and say, well, okay then, it's not really an investment transaction, we're just delivering these. It's like American Airlines frequent flyer points, okay, they depreciate heinously with time and all the rules change, but you didn't ever buy them as a currency. You didn't buy into them as an investment because, whoa, I think that frequent flyer program is going to make me a millionaire. No, you didn't buy them, you got them, you earned them, and now you can trade them around and do stuff. So that's a utility token, equivalent, right? Unfortunately, when you get right down to it and listen to what the SEC says, they are saying if you are raising a large amount of money from investors who are expecting to make a profit because they purchase your tokens or coins, then, hey, this is an investment transaction, and the SEC's whole life is focused about regulating that, and they're not going to allow people to get away with it. There is only one exception to that I'm aware of. It's been done, and this was done in 2017 legitimately with SEC buy-in, which isn't the same as saying that they would agree with themselves this year, right? We are actually going to go back to them in order to double check and make sure that we can do another one like that. We didn't do the one last year, but the company that did is working with us to do an initial public offering for the company that they already did an initial coin offering with last year, which is kind of cool when it's done properly. A transaction selling shares for that same company that sold tokens last year. What they did in their token offering was they didn't market it as an investment. It wasn't, whoa, you should buy this because it's an investment, therefore the implication is you can make a lot of money, or the statement of the claim. And the other thing was they were able to demonstrate to the SEC that legitimate businesses that they wanted to and were already partnered with could only transact with them by getting the tokens. So they were selling the tokens for business purposes in a B2B model, and it was very carefully done, and literally the way it was promoted was, it's not investment. If you want to buy the tokens to partner with us, you know, we'll do this. And that's the only exception I've seen that's legitimate, and hopefully it'll stay legitimate. When it comes down to doing an initial coin offering, the instruments that we have available are Regulation D, selling to accredited US investors, Regulation S, which is pretty much the same for non-US investors. They don't have to be accredited though, so that's helpful. And Regulation A+, which has been my company's specialty since I launched it, which is this whole different system where all of the investors are liquid immediately that they buy the tokens or the shares, assuming that the company selling those tokens wants them to be liquid. Of course, they can lock them up, right? When you see an initial public offering, the public buys the shares and they can sell them today, tomorrow, whenever they want. The insiders are locked and have a lockup on them for 6 months typically, where they can't sell them at all. That's because the company doesn't want to flood the market with shares, and the same thing applies to tokens. So that's a prudent balance. But so Reg A Plus has huge advantages and disadvantages because you have to go to the SEC and file it, and it takes time to get qualified by the SEC to get allowed to conduct the transaction. It costs money to do that, but it's not ridiculously expensive. You can do an initial coin offering via Reg A Plus with a tremendous securities attorney that knows the ropes, and the total legal cost is $50K. That's impressive. I've got one attorney that would do it for $40K, and he's a great guy. So that's, I don't quote that because I think he'll end up raising his price. But Reg D is actually, the attorney side of it is much simpler. Where it gets more complex is, whoa, this is an initial coin offering. We better do this properly. And if we're dealing with it, if an attorney thinks it's simple, I won't touch them because they're totally wrong. The part that's simple is knowing what a Reg D is and writing it. What isn't simple is doing the other bits to make a transaction. So, in my opinion, if you need $100 million to build your business and you raise $7 billion, well, actually 4 billion is more relevant because one ICO has raised 4 billion. And they did it over a whole year. Most of them actually raised money in a few hours after a preparatory period of building. Maybe the first phase is cash in so they can spend the money to do the rest of it, and then the big raise takes place in hours after a couple of months of promotion. This one lasted for a year. They raised $4 billion. What I've seen happen many times in the internet bubble, the first internet bubble in the 90s, late 90s was, and 2000s was a really good example of this. When overfunded, companies they have a tendency to build the wrong bloody culture. They're thinking team building and hiring and leadership and communication and retreats and wonderful facilities. And you can do that for years without paying attention to revenue and traction and what the hell is actually working out there, building a real business. And I've seen it over and over again. When you've got to actually make the numbers happen because you raise a sensible amount of money, this is a better culture. You're less likely to fail, right? That's a really big deal. That's not technically one of the biggest mistakes. Technically, there's been a bunch of breaches of the rules. So people have been using, if you will, stock touts. Somebody that a major figure says, this ICO is the best, I love it so much, or whatever, and they're spreading that word and leveraging their fan base. It's cool, they're paid for it. It's illegal, it's flat out illegal, right? So now we're in a different era where people are smart enough not to do that. Finder's fees outside the US, most countries, not all of them. Singapore is very carefully regulated, and Switzerland has its own specific regulations for ICOs. But in many countries around the world, it's allowed to say to somebody, well, could you bring in $500,000 from your incredibly impressive investor network, and we'll pay you 5%. That's allowed. There's no rules against that outside the US. So, we're dealing with ICOs outside the US that want to go live inside. They want to raise money and they want to be live in. They want to transact. They want their tokens moving. They can't be locked out of the US. So it's a common problem where it's so easy for them in many countries around the world to raise money in that way. Well, if somebody's well connected, they can actually bring in capital to an attractive offering, and they're being paid to do so in a handsome manner. Here, you have to be a broker-dealer to accept that kind of money. And even then, only when there's a proper contract in place, blah, blah, blah. So that isn't really what's happening here, because so few broker-dealers are involved in ICOs at all yet. What's really happening is you've got to spend money in marketing in an online platform environment like my company does, but it's not my company per se. It's spending money on marketing, developing traction, bringing in investors. This is expensive stuff, and it has to be funded up front. So that makes it more difficult. What I'm regularly advising is they are allowed to actually, by the SEC, they're allowed to start raising money internationally using the rule system of their place, where they are, where they're based. Raise some money there with your rule systems, and then when you've got enough money in the bank to fund the ongoing marketing and the other aspects to do it in the US, then let's go live here with a properly prepared approach. That works for that situation. Liquidity too early is kind of a nice way of saying that a lot of ICOs, and this is happening still outside the US, they'll bring in big investors, have a big name, and they'll bring in a large sum of money up front, which gives credibility to the offering. But what you don't know, what is happening in those cases, and not in regulated transactions over here, but in these transactions which are being done illegitimately in the US, which I hope that there are very few, and outside the US because the rules allow it, somebody buys in at 3 cents per token, and then before the money has been finished raising, they're selling them at $3 a token to people who are buying them as an investment when who the hell knows what's going to happen? Who the hell knows how much money will be raised? That's not real. You just can't do that. That's game playing. That's making money in a way that is completely illegitimate in the US rule system, right? So, but there were quite a few initial coin offerings who thought that was cool. Okay. Another mistake is to be sure and confident that the token is a utility, so it's not a problem with the SEC. We're in the US, we're doing this issuance, and usually they're wrong, but that's a common mistake. Another one is company is in the US, its operations and its owners are in the US, but hey, it's so much easier if you're in Hong Kong or the Channel Islands in the UK or in Switzerland. So we're going to the company sets up a subsidiary or sets up an entity over there. But what is not commonly understood is that has to be, if it's a legitimate offshore entity, it has to pass a lot of sniff tests. And the simplest obvious one is that less than 49% of that new entity can be owned by US people or US entities. So you've got a founder that owns 100% of it. And when they realize they can only own 49% of it, at the start of everything, that's scary, and they don't want to do it. But there are companies that are doing this kind of thing, or there were, I should say. So that's a mistake to avoid. It's important. There are obvious things. You're raising money. People should be locked into the company through vesting of some sort. So they can't just take the money and run for the hills. You've got to tie them in where they're vesting. They don't own the tokens until they've earned them over time. That's common. It's remarkably common practice in stock offerings in the US, and it's what we recommend for initial coin offerings. Strap-on tokens is where, are we doing okay? Is everyone with me? Would sleep be a better option? You are sleeping. Okay, so we're good. The strap-on tokens is where a company that's having difficulty raising money in its current form decides that it can do an initial coin offering because that's easier to raise money. And then they build a token and it's like, yeah, right, but what's it do? Does it use the blockchain? Of course it has to. And what's it doing? How is it relevant to the business? Because when it isn't, this isn't going to fly, obviously, right? That's an obvious mistake to avoid. No one in this room would make that mistake, of course. And then hype. When you're doing securities transactions within the SEC regulations, you're not allowed to hype them. And then when the offering is continued, when the offering is completed, and if the tokens are trading, you're not allowed to hype the market and create publicity that looks good, that isn't substantial, in order to jack up the price of the tokens to make money or to make it look like you're really successful because you build hype on hype on hype, right? You can't do that. Okay, so in terms of long-term success, I think some of these are very obvious. The team must be superb. They can't just be a casually put together team. It is generally two efforts. That what the regular business does, even if it's a regular business fulfilling all of the delivery of services that go along with the token offering. The token itself is its own system. You've got voting rights being included, which is something I should have mentioned earlier, from helping make a ICO engage with investors, is to involve the community, because what I didn't touch on in my brief description about who invests in ICOs is that there's a lot of idealism in these people, the Bitcoin wealthy. They want democracy, they want equal access, they want better prices for stuff when people are being ripped off, they want more efficiency in the systems in place, they want to show how the blockchain is so wonderful by having it eclipse the old way. They want to do that. That's kind of a thing because they believe it can be done, and they're working diligently, or at least investing diligently, to cause that to occur. Demonstrated commitment is things like stock vesting. You've got to be real, have a real team, it's got to be genuine. In the past, ICOs could raise money with flimsy teams. You know, when you look, you say, you know, who is this? I can't click through, I can't find them in social media. This is an imaginary team. It may be real, but they need to show me that they're real, right? We're at a stage now where a lot more maturity is in place. And then other things, you know, actually driving and paying attention to the business and pivoting as necessary, very obvious stuff. Future evolution of SEC compliant initial coin offerings. I think I should bring somebody in to talk about that. It's a good subject. So there will, over time, it'll take a heck of a lot more time than anyone wants to believe, be some regulatory changes. Sometimes it'll be by announcement of statements from the SEC. We've seen some of that recently where they kind of realized they put the freezer on too much with all the various announcements that they made. And so they've made some softening qualification statements that say, well, actually, this is what we're doing over here. So that's helping. And there'll be other things like that. And there'll be regulations that are changed as they wrap their minds around what's going on and look for the good in it and figure out ways in which they can enable initial coin offerings whilst requiring them to be real. That's going to happen. There are a lot of big businesses that want in. You see evidence of that in the press, right? But I mean, I'm not talking about big banks and things. Enterprise companies are taking this more seriously. They don't want to be eclipsed by their competitors doing it instead of them and nuking them, right? So that's going to happen. And in our case, we announced our ICO program last year in August. And I was worried we would get flooded with dinky little companies that had, you know, a concept on a napkin. But those guys weren't thinking about the regulations and how important it was. So we didn't hear from them. What we did hear from was more established companies that are doing real business already, some of them very successful, very sizable, and they're in our prospect funnel, and they're waiting for us to prove success and for the freezer to come off, you know, the freeze to pass. So they're waiting for credibility and an opportunity to do it. They don't want to upset, they don't want to even go to their board with a proposal until the board will buy into it, right? That kind of thing. Some really good companies, though, that are far more established than one would imagine, are in that state. It's impressive. It's exciting to see them, know what they're up to. Banks will end up adopting cryptocurrencies, at least Bitcoin. There's so many things they'll end up doing with it. In many cases, they'll invent their own cryptocurrency, which they will use to do transactions. It's happening. It's happening more obviously and more publicly in smaller countries, smaller banks, but there's a lot more of that going on behind the scenes now in the big players. There was a point in time last year where Bitcoin was so newsworthy and the price had gone so ballistically high, it was like sucking all the attention out of fintech and out of banking as a whole. And the banking communities, you know, the credit card players, all of them started stepping back and saying, well, what's going on? This is terrible. We've got to stop that. So let's ban everybody from doing anything with that stuff. And that's going to work. Yeah, right. In the short term, it works. In the long run, it doesn't at all. So that's softening as well, and they're becoming a bit more real. I mentioned really indirectly, I mentioned financial transaction adoption. We'll see things like inexpensive instant transfers of money instead of the current wire transfer thing, where you don't really know if it got there. Technically, it's already arrived, and they make you wait 3 to 5 days because they want to use the money in the meantime and pretend it didn't arrive, as if it was on a slow boat or a remarkably slow aeroplane, right? So those sorts of things are coming. Regular investors, you know, we'll see at the moment it's heavily biased, as I mentioned, to the Bitcoin wealthy, and that'll gradually change. It's going to gradually shift over the next 5 years to more and more conventional investors playing and participating. And we'll see the rights that token offerings bring to their investors improving with that. Because your average skeptical, savvy, practiced investor is not going to accept just ownership of the coin. They want ownership of the company, and they want a percentage of profits one way or another. And so in order to get them and engage them and raise the money, it's going to be necessary to play the game that they already know. And, you know, there'll be a gradual transfer adjustment, and there'll be, you know, special types and hybrids and things, but that's coming along. And, you know, really, that's about all I had to say. I've got other stuff, but I think we've covered the ground, at least somewhat sufficiently. Yeah, questions?
So, if I'm a legitimate business.
I'm pleased to hear it.
Company,
yep.
Honoring 20 million. I put the ICO out there. How do I know that some Mexican drug cartel that's got a company in Nevis is not going to give me 15 million?
Right, right. Yeah, great question.
I'm sort of morally oriented. I don't want to be
right. Great question. So what we have to do in these transactions that we're conducting under the SEC regulations is we have to do what we call know your customer, which is get all the necessary information so we know who they are. And then we have to do an anti-money laundering check, which really says they're not on a federal bad actor list. And then we do more than that. We go deeper, you know, if somebody's got, for example, if there's ambiguity about their identity, they seem to be this person, but we see a gray zone there, then we highlight that to the company raising money, and we look into it and dig in more deeply, request more ID, do what it takes. And if we never can get that, then we don't accept their investment because we don't want to have that kind of problem, right? So it's us going to the company, and they don't want that problem. It's not like we have to twist their arm. But the information is being gathered, and it's already being protected. The process is already protecting in that way in the US, and with transactions that we do from the US when we're doing it Reg S outside or Reg A plus worldwide. Fair enough?
So if I do my,
Be my guest, you're fine.
so if I do my ICO and I go out and I raise $50 million, my proceeds going to be like Litecoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin, and then I have to convert those to fiat, or
Up to you. So the way it works is this: that if you take the simple flavor, a company is using Ethereum mostly. That's the biggest market share player. They are a token generation platform that make it easy to create a new token and a smart contract to do what you plan with your business. They make it easy to raise money ahead of the token's existence through investments using Ethereum, or if the company chooses other currencies. So what we do is we say, yeah, right, that's great, But if an investor wants to invest and they don't have a wallet right now with crypto in it, then wouldn't it be good to let them invest in with check, not with check, with wire, with an ACH or debit card, because those are all legitimate by the SEC in the US. So by adding that lot, then somebody that likes it and doesn't have a wallet can actually invest conveniently now. So we do that because some companies need it, and it's obviously going to increase with time. And then which cryptocurrencies each issuer chooses to accept is up to them. But we handle all that for them through our system.
So does the issuer have to also go through your wallet?
Yes. The issuer has to have a wallet in order to receive the money. And the simplest case, let's say the issuer is using Ethereum, then it's an Ethereum wallet that you create in the company's name.
But the coin that I issue in exchange for Ethereum, how does the investor hold that?
How does what?
How does the investor hold that coin?
So when the tokens or coins are issued, because usually the money is raised and they don't exist yet. There are rare exceptions where they already exist. When they don't exist, you've got the money, it is in one or other form of secure storage. And when the tokens exist, then you deliver them and take the money and say, thank you, we're done. Right? Yes. So when you're doing it in a regulated manner, then they are investing one way or the other in a form that is restricted. So if there's a minimum to the raise and it hasn't been met yet, then no money can be drawn out. It's in escrow effectively. It can be smart contract escrow, it can be in regular bank escrow, but we do either one, right? And the other thing we do for conventional offerings, which isn't as interesting to initial coin offerings, is we take in the crypto and hedge it to the dollar immediately. So you don't have to worry about it doing this or this. Well, you wouldn't worry about that, but you would worry about this, right? And it's hard on the accountants. It's where they put in $10,000, but it's 12 now. What are we going to do? Do we refund them the 2,000? You don't want to have that hassle. So in the case of a conventional offering, we'll typically see the company will immediately use that and hedge it to the dollar. Not as much so in a ICO. Other questions?
In 94, DigiCash was the big Bitcoin, et cetera. By 99, it had died. I want to know what the difference is between 94 and today. And having said that, I'm going to say Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, even in this, that he's looking into it. But what I'm intrigued by is what's the difference in the last 24 years? How has this changed, and how are we not getting into some sort of similar bubble in the next 6-8 years? Because you watch the rally go up to 16,000 and come back down to 7. Everyone focuses on the 0 to whatever they're gaining. No one's actually acknowledging the folks who bought at 16,000 and who are now sitting at 7,000 if they have to execute those losses. So those are two separate questions, but the one I want to focus on is how are we different from 94?
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
Fair.
But what I can say is that to me, Bitcoin is largely a distraction, because especially when it's doing amazing things on the price side, right? Because people focus on buying Bitcoin as an investment, which may or may not be a smart idea, but it's totally different than where the value add is with the blockchain. The blockchain enables so many things that couldn't be done before. That is where the value lies. That is where the leverage comes from, is building upon it, right? The value of Bitcoin has effects. It puts the Bitcoin wealthy in a little bit of an uncomfortable position when the currency drops too much and they're not going to be as prolific investing, right? So it has big effects, but it is unrelated to the fundamentals of where the blockchain will add so much value over time. So I'm not worried about individual tokens and coins and how they trade. To me, that's irrelevant. It's significant in its own way, but the real relevance of this is what you can do that you couldn't do with the blockchain and all the amazing innovation that's taking place. I mean, the amount of innovation that I see in the blockchain companies compared to what I see in the same number of conventional companies is stratospherically higher. It's really impressive. And that's what happens when you're in the beginning of a new wave of opportunity and leveraging some significant strategic new development, which is what the blockchain is. It's a technology that is delivering a strategic opportunity that wasn't there before. And so those of us that are involved in it stand to do very well. by immersing ourselves in it and adding value. Totally separate from what Bitcoin is, or will be worth, in my view.
Is there a certain type of company that's perfect fit to go into ICO?
Well,
Size or
obviously size, better established, more existing with a real team is very helpful. But when it comes to what's going to fly, there's really two kinds of transactions, two kinds of initial coin offerings that are successful today. One is, oh my God, there's a gaping hole over here. You can't do Bitcoin or other currency transactions fast enough. Let's fix that. Somebody fixing it fundamentally or fixing other issues like security issues, those are big. Those are going to add a lot of value to the entire space or to some large segment of it. So those are doing really well. They're essentially, it's like when the second internet browser came out for the internet, that was a big deal because the first one wasn't very good, the second one was better. You need that. Then the other type of activity is brand new companies, usually, they don't have to be brand new, they're brand new ideas, doing amazing things. So, there's more than one company out there now that is developing an ICO to lock in our health data and protect it and allow us to make money when we allow companies to use it. So it takes out the middlemen and says, I don't want that to be disclosed. It's my business. Or I'm happy to, and you tell me this is the range of price that I can get for use for the following kinds of uses. I'll take that price there. That's what I'm open to. I'm not open to less than that. That's your choice, right? We don't get that right now. We'll get that and a lot of other cool things as a result of the blockchain, which is going to be good. It's going to, I don't want to sound like some kind of extremist, harping away on this wonderful new world, but there will be good things that will come along. The internet was, I'll never forget, I got a call in 1993 from a well-known VC at that time, and he was wanting to know my opinion about, was the internet going to stick around? Was it going to be a factor? It's like, fuck, who are you? You're a VC, for Christ's sake. It was blatantly obvious if you were there and paying attention at that stage. Okay, it was hobbled by this and that and the other thing. It was going to be big. Precisely what? Who would have known, right? The way it's played out, you don't know. But it's going to be huge when it looks like it will. I've been pretty good at identifying significant real trends and being right on that. I have a good track record there. And I'm old enough now that it's a bit easier because I've seen it before in different flavors. So this is real to me. Okay, any other questions?
What's the limitations of Reg A+?
So Reg A Plus, the disadvantages of it are the cost that you have an expense of filing, not ridiculous, time. So you've got a 4-month journey typically before you can become approved by, they don't use the word approved, qualified by the SEC, preceded by getting an audit done, if that's relevant. If it's a brand new company, you still have to have an audit, but it's trivial. If you've got a long and complex history, the last 2 years have to be audited. That takes more time and money. So that expense, and then the marketing expense, because nobody just comes running to you, you have to bring them, and that's the cost of raising money. So in a Reg A Plus that should be there online raising money because it fits, which is critically damn important. That's what we do, right? We don't want to waste people's time or ours on companies that don't have what it takes. You're talking 2 to 5% marketing spend on the cap per unit of money that you raise. And you can do IPOs with Reg A Plus too, but that's a more special case scenario. And then other downsides, it has to be a US headquartered or Canadian headquartered company. And you have the other significant downside is there's another variant of Reg A Plus which doesn't matter because virtually no one can use it except banks, regional banks, local banks. If you do the normal kind of Reg A Plus offering, then you have a reporting obligation to the SEC and your investors, where once every 6 months you report your P&L and your revenue. And at any time there's a dramatic change in the business, you report that too, with a once-a-year US GAAP audit. So that's not too onerous, but that's what it is. And if you then choose to list on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, then when you do that, now you're a real full-on public company with all the much more expensive reporting responsibilities, quarterlies, and so forth. But in a Reg A Plus, you don't have to do that. You don't have to list. But the shares are all liquid, so it's pretty good when used properly. Yeah, go ahead.
You said the shares are liquid. I'm curious to know, how does it affect the options markets?
Well, it doesn't. We're in this stage where Reg A Plus there's been $1.5 billion raised in Reg A Plus to date. Most of that has been more recently. So it went effective in the summer of 2015. Nothing much happened. 2016 it built. 2017 was good. 2018 is 60% up month on month in comparison. So 1.5 billion is not too shabby, but compared to ICO's numbers, it's a lot smaller, obviously. But it's progressing well, but it's not yet hit stride. In my view, Reg A Plus, when it starts serving the real need for mature startups and mid-stage companies, just in the US, I think it'll be gigantic compared to where it is. But to answer your question, there have been insufficient IPOs to say, well, you know, what's different? What is different is that it's been a learning journey. The first IPO was a year ago. There's about 12 Reg A Plus IPOs that are effective out there listed. They haven't performed well in the aftermarket. And there are reasons of, you know, okay, some of them push for too high valuations. Some of them haven't reported enough posts. You know, they haven't done enough post-listing. And the big problem for all of them is that they haven't used the green shoe, which is named after when the Green Shoe Company went public 60-odd years ago. They were the first company to use the green shoe, which provides the underwriter a method by which to provide pricing support post-IPO so that unscrupulous brokers don't put naked short positions on your stock and kill it. In Reg A Plus, they haven't done one green shoe yet, and I've actually come up with what I call not for public consumption. I won't name it because I'm on the camera over there. Yeah, I have a solution to that which I will not name at this point.
Red shoe?
Pardon? A red shoe, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Anyway, so there is a solution to that, which is different to implement. And when that's done, and when more care is taken, we will see some much more solid aftermarket performance. There's one of the IPOs that's trading up right now. That's not enough, right? Part of it's timing, but a big part of it is, you know, the various things I said just now. And frankly, if you've just listed and you're relatively illiquid, and the brokers, the unscrupulous ones, can put naked shorts on your stock, you are screwed, right? Until you can really kick them by putting positive news out that is dramatic. You know, it can't be incremental. It's a tough place to be. I didn't even know you could do that. You know, I was on the phone with one of the top people at the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ people both. They love Reg A Plus because they need new publicly listed companies. So they're, you know, rolling out the red carpet to us because we're bringing some to them. And the guy at the New York Stock Exchange, he pulled up the regulation and read it to me out of convenience and fun because we were chatting. And it's like, oh my God, I could drive 3 buses through that. I mean, there is no limit on what the naked shorts that brokers can put on. That's a big problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Thank you.